Renate, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilyich. Welcome to this first lecture. We will start this lecture with a question. Do you know that thought, that impression, which is actually more an inner knowing, that there is something within us that is continuously showing us that we can do better? Perhaps you recognize the thought that we can act more justly, that we can live more harmoniously with each other, and more in tune with our inner truth? If your answer is yes, then you recognize during those moments the possibility and desire for a grander, more ethical, and more interconnected way of life. This desire for greater harmony we may also experience when we look at the disharmony in the world today, the conflicts and refugee flows, the injustice, poverty, and environmental issues we see around us. In those moments, we look, as it were, at the world through two windows. Through one, we see the world as it is. Through the other, as the world can be. When we look through the latter window, it is abundantly clear that we all can do much better. And when we connect directly with that insight, then we will not only acknowledge it, but we will also want to do something about it. When we look at the world in this way, we experience the lack of something we once were connected with. This is a kind of homesickness, which we may call the homesickness of the soul. It is an intuitive longing for the state of harmony in which we once have been and which we long for again in the depth of ourselves. On the website, in the announcement of this symposium, you have read that we maintain that in every human heart there is a longing for connection and unity, for true connection with others, with the greater whole of which we are part, with something greater within ourselves that wants to express itself. And that, no matter how busy we are in our lives, this realization always keeps presenting itself, constantly encouraging us to move forward. That realization can be called our spiritual instinct, the homesickness of the spiritual soul within us, welling up from the depth of our hearts. That spiritual soul within us we can think of as our inmost and most abiding core. It is the immortal part in us that constantly gives us impulses to evolve and develop ourselves to do better. It is that part in us that shows us how to live together in peace and compassion, which in every human, animal and plant has a place under the sun and can grow and flourish outwardly and inwardly. It is the core or source of our consciousness. It is that part within us we can see as the guide in our lives. We experience these inner impulses sometimes strongly and sometimes less strongly. Less, for example, when we are primarily focused on the outer world or on obtaining material things that are temporary in nature and only benefit ourselves. On the contrary, we can experience this connection much more intensely when we turn our gaze inward to the inner, more ethical realms by forgetting our personal interests and focusing our thoughts and acts on the development and well-being of the whole. in those moments when our attention is directed inward, we let go of the continuous noise of personal concerns about the outer life, and thus can connect with the deeper visions and intuitions present within us. In those moments, we can perceive the imbalance in the world so clearly. We become so keenly aware of the suffering in the world that compassion within us awakens. Sometimes, when we manage to shut ourselves off from any distractions from the outer world, and our gaze is completely turned inward, we may even feel for a passing moment completely at one with the cosmos. Then we realize that there is something greater. Then we see the underlying force or unity in which all things live and are inseparably connected, in which all beings have their existence and fulfill their task. What then is the underlying unity? So we see that this longing for a deeper dimension comes from our inner awareness or inner knowing that behind all outer forms there is an underlying force. That underlying force is the one life. The search for an understanding of it begins with the questions: who are we in essence? Are we all individuals separate from one another, or are we part of a greater whole? Without exception, the world teachers of all the great traditions will point us to the latter. But what is that greater whole, and how can we connect to it and actively live by it? What is that one life, which is boundless, everywhere present and eternal? It is the source from which all beings in the universe manifest, and to which they all inseparably belong. We are essentially that one life. We are, so to speak, like the drops in a great ocean of life, like the sparks of a cosmic fire, like the colors from a wide ray of light split through a prism, like the branches and leaves of one great tree of life, through which flows the universal cosmic stream of life. Truly everything, then, is alive. Everything is living. There is consciousness operating behind all manifestation, and you can recognize this by the fact that all beings respond to all other beings. In the universe, there is nothing that is not alive. From the smallest atom to the mineral world, to plants, animals, and the planets we humans are part of, to the galaxy and beyond, everything is alive. All life is rooted in the one life, our deepest base of existence. Therefore, the idea that we can be separate from this unity as distinct individuals is a misconception. This sense of separateness isolates one human from the other, and this sense, as we have just seen, is not reality. For when we realize we are part of the unity of life, we will in effect awaken thoughts of a higher quality in ourselves, such as responsibility for one another and wanting to contribute to the unfolding of all life. How does this big whole function, and what is our own place in it? In the ocean of infinite life, everything is part of something greater. It has an orderly structure in which each being is in turn a part of a larger being, which we call life within life. A simple example of this are the living cells and organs that are part of our bodies. And similarly, man is part of the living earth, which in turn is part of the living solar system, which in turn is part of the living galaxy. And this goes on infinitely. There is one great boundless cooperation of life within life. So all living beings are inseparable links in the great whole. From this we can conclude that there is not one supreme God who creates life, because every being is eternal, is in essence the one life, without beginning and without end. Because the one life is boundless, every one of us has boundless potentialities within themselves. We can, during our successive incarnations, express more and more of these. We are therefore on a journey with each other. Each being is at a different level of its inner development, and this explains the variety of beings we see around us. That diversity, if you pay attention, is immense. There is no star in the firmament that is exactly the same as another star. There is no human being with exactly the same character as any of his fellow human beings. Every leaf of a tree, yes, every cell in our body is not exact the same as the others. Why? Because during the endless past, all these beings have gone through a unique path of development, of unfolding. So, we are all on a spiritual pilgrimage within the boundless one life. We have, to take up the earlier analogy, emerged from the cosmic fire as unconscious sparks and are going through a journey of inner growth to be able to return to the one life self-consciously. Our boundless potentialities are the origin of our urge to bring out more of ourselves. By going further and further inward and upward, a path is formed that leads us back to our source, the one life. This return to our source is the key to understand where the homesickness of our soul, which we just talked about, comes from. It is the memory of our deepest core of its sojourn in its original spiritual home, the one life, which as a vague memory is still present in us and is the origin of all our ideals, intuitions, and aspiration. This deepest core always encourages us to expand our understanding and live more nobly. When we do so, we connect more and more with our own core. You can also say, we reconnect with it, because after all, we came from it. It is our source. We all emerged from a state of unity that we were not aware of at that time. We were like babies, feeling harmony, but not self-consciously realizing it. Our challenge now, as self-conscious thinkers, is to purposefully learn to know that unity, familiarize ourselves with it, and eventually become it. H.P. Blavatsky put it this way in her beautiful book, The Voice of Silence. Thou shalt not separate thy being from being, and from everything else, but unite the ocean with the drop, and the drop with the ocean. This self-conscious reconnection we can call religion. The word religion is derived from the Latin religare, and that means to reconnect. You reconnect with what you essentially are, and from which you were in fact never separate, from which you perhaps thought to be separate for some time, but now you see through the illusion. So, to practice religion in this pure sense is to reconnect with your own spiritual core. And by reconnecting with your spiritual core, you reconnect with all that lives. You discover that your core is in no way different from anyone else's core. You recognize your fundamental equality with the whole world and all its inhabitants, and start supporting them in every way possible, knowing that every being is perfectly equal to every other being. In this inspiring sense, religion is relevant to all of us, for every human being is potentially religious, whether a person currently experiences it that way or not. After all, the deepest core of every human being is rooted in boundless life, in unity. Is practicing religion a matter of believing or seeking truth and consciously reconnecting with it? It is the latter. You can investigate whether behind the multiplicity of beings there is unity underlying it. You can also investigate whether all things are inseparably connected to each other and thus continually influence each other. You can also examine whether every human being longs in its deepest layers for harmony, for mutual understanding, for mutual support. Because true religion is self-acquired understanding of life. You can apply it independently in all circumstances, even under very difficult circumstances. You never have to lean on authorities. You can always appeal to your own capacity for understanding. Well, what are the consequences if we assume that boundless unity is a fact? The first consequence is perhaps a very surprising one. It is that we need never again seek for unity, neither in the world nor in the community in which we live. For that unity and connectedness is already there. Already is it very fundamentally present. The great challenge is to live from that basic idea, from that realization. We no longer strive for unity, but use it as a starting point and live by it. The second consequence is of an ethical nature. It concerns the development of one's own moral compass. The desire to strengthen unselfishness in the world is the logical consequence of our sense of unity. After all, what happens to other beings has as much to do with us as what happens to ourselves. Ethics, then, is grounded in the nature of the universe. Those who think only of their own personal benefits not only go against the fundamental law of the universe, but also go against the fundamental law of one's own immortal part, thereby increasing both the disharmony in the world and in oneself. In the book The Voice of Silence by H.P. Blavatsky, we find this thought beautifully expressed. Help nature and work with her, and nature will regard you as one of its creators and bow down before you. If we now look at religion from the idea of the boundlessness of life, we see that there is no end point in our attempts to live more religiously. There is no limit to our self-conscious understanding of our connectedness to the unity. We can always learn to live more in harmony with the unity, each one on its own inner path and at its own pace. This is a thought that can fill it with wonder, an inner growth that can go on forever. But it is the logical conclusion from all we have said. After all, every being is boundless at its core. This thought also implies that there exist more advanced beings who have already developed that sense of unity in a much higher degree than any of us. And in the minds of those more advanced beings, that may still be a vague image of unity for us, has become a crystal clear vision for them. For them it is not a theory, but self-conscious and evident knowledge and experience. These spiritual forerunners incessantly point humanity to the reality of the one life, so that message can be received by all humans in each age. These precursors of us are the ones who periodically give the keynote of unity a new impulse to inspire humanity. The more people who listen to this impulse and do something with it, the stronger will its development in the world grow. Indeed, all people who act from this keynote will then learn from each other and thereby inspire each other. We can say that where we find disharmony in the world, people do not sufficiently recognize and understand the unity of life yet. The various world teachers, therefore, always bring the same message with the same essence to the world, namely that of the unity of life, harmonious cooperation, compassion for all that lives, and using our growing qualities to contribute to the one life. So it is up to us to understand that essential thought better and work it out for ourselves into clear ideas, which others can understand in their turn. By growing in understanding, we will step by step create together an atmosphere through which the inspiration from that one universal source can flow and flower in the world. Now we have spoken in this introduction about the one life, about the longing in our human heart for connection and unity. We will enrich our thoughts together in the workshop following this lecture. The title of this workshop is How Can You Recognize the One Life? To conclude this first lecture, we will end the following inspiring quote from the book The Secret Doctrine of H.P. Blavatsky. It is a master talking to his student. Lift up your head, O Lanu. Do you see one or countless lights above you, burning in the dark midnight sky? I perceive one flame, O Gurudeva. I see numerous non-separate sparks shining there. You have spoken well. And now see around you and within yourself. Do you have the impression that the light that burns within you is in any way different from the light that shines in your fellow man? It is not different in any way. Although karma keeps the captive in chains, and although its outward garment deceives the ignorant and makes them say, your soul and my soul. Thank you.